There is a moment in every sport where the story stops being about statistics and starts being about something you can feel in your chest, and if you were anywhere near a television or a phone or even just a conversation about women's tennis on April 14, 2026, you already know exactly what moment I am talking about. Because what happened inside the Porsche Arena in Stuttgart, Germany that afternoon was not just a tennis match. It was a declaration, and if you have been following Alexandra Eala's journey through this season even casually, you knew somewhere in the back of your mind that a moment like this was coming, you just did not know it would arrive this fast, this clean, this absolute. So let me take you back to the beginning, not just to Stuttgart, but to the whole story, because you cannot understand what happened on center court without understanding everything that led up to it. And the story of Alex in 2026 is one of the most quietly remarkable stories in professional sports this year, because nobody handed her anything, nobody cleared the path, nobody moved the obstacles aside. Every single step forward she has taken this season has been earned against resistance, against doubt, against the kind of skepticism that follows a young player from a country that has never produced a WTA champion into the most competitive environment in professional women's tennis. And the first wave of that doubt came early, when she started showing results on clay. The critics said it was a fluke. They said clay was not her surface. They said the results would not hold when the competition stiffened. Then she went to Linz and beat Griha in straight sets on clay, and the narrative shifted slightly, but the doubt did not disappear. It just changed shape. And then came the Ostapenko match, and this is the part of the story that I think gets misread every single time it gets told. Because people see the scoreline and they see a loss and they move on. But if you actually watched that match, if you sat with the full 2 sets and tracked what was happening point by point, what you saw was Alex leading 4-2 in the first set, you saw her leading 5-1 in the second set, you saw her one hold away from winning that second set 6-1 against a Grand Slam champion. And yes, Ostapenko came back, and yes, she won, and yes, the scoreline shows a defeat. But the story inside that scoreline is one of the most encouraging performances any young player has delivered this entire season, because you do not lead Jelena Ostapenko 5-1 in a second set on clay by accident. You do that by playing better tennis, more composed tennis, more tactically disciplined tennis than a player who has won a Roland Garros title. And the fact that Alex could not close it out tells you something about where her game still needs to grow. But the fact that she was there at all, controlling that match for such a sustained stretch, tells you something much more important about where her game already is. And that is the context you need to carry into Stuttgart, a player who has spent the entire 2026 season collecting evidence that she belongs at this level, building a 15-9 record where every single loss came against a top-tier opponent, reaching the semi-final in Auckland, the quarter-final in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, the 4th round at Indian Wells and Miami. These are not consolation results. These are the results of a player systematically climbing, and she walks into Stuttgart carrying all of that momentum, all of that form, all of that accumulated confidence, as an alternate who got into the draw because Zheng Qinwen withdrew. So she is not even supposed to be here in the official sense. She is the player nobody planned for, the wildcard that the draw did not account for. And there is something deeply fitting about that, because Alex's entire season has felt exactly like that, the result nobody quite predicted. The player who keeps showing up in places the conventional wisdom said she should not be. And on the other side of the net stood Leylah Fernandez, and I want to be careful here because Leylah Fernandez is a genuinely brilliant tennis player. She is 23 years old, she has 5 WTA titles, she reached a US Open final where she beat Osaka and Kerber and Sabalenka in consecutive rounds. She has the kind of natural talent that does not just disappear. But the Fernandez who walked onto center court in Stuttgart in April 2026 was not the Fernandez who lit up Flushing Meadows, and the numbers make that impossible to ignore. 4 wins and 9 losses on the season, 5 first-round exits, a second-round loss in Charleston where she was bageled in the second set by Diana Schneider, and when a player of Fernandez's ability is losing in the second set 6-0 on clay, that is not a bad day, that is a confidence crisis. That is a player who has lost the thread of her own game and is searching for it in the middle of matches instead of arriving with it already in hand. And here is the detail that the mainstream coverage almost entirely missed going into this match. Alex and Fernandez had already played each other, not in singles, but in doubles at the Abu Dhabi Open back in February, and Alex's pair won that match, won the match tiebreak. And while doubles and singles are different sports in meaningful ways, what that encounter did was dissolve the mystery. Because one of the invisible advantages a more experienced player carries into a first meeting is the unknown. The opponent who has never seen you up close does not know how your shots feel, does not know how you move, does not know the rhythm of your game under pressure, and for Alex that advantage was already gone before the first ball was struck. She had stood on the same court as Fernandez, she had read her patterns, she had competed against her and won. And Fernandez knew coming in that Alex is not the kind of player who gets starstruck by a resume and then layer on top of all of that something that almost no preview mentioned, the fact that Alex spent the week before this match practicing on the Stuttgart clay alongside Iga Swiatek, the world number 4, the two-time Stuttgart champion, the most dominant clay court player currently active on tour. And think about what that means for a moment, not just physically but psychologically, because when your practice partner all week has been operating at that level, when you have been tracking balls hit by the best clay court player in the world, when your feet have been moving at a pace set by a Grand Slam champion, and then you walk out to face a player who is mired in a 4-9 season and coming off a bagel loss in Charleston, the adjustment is not upward, it is downward. The ball comes slower, the angles are less severe, the court feels bigger, the time between shots feels longer, the whole experience of the match is more manageable than what you have been absorbing in practice. And that is not a minor psychological edge, that is a profound one. Because confidence in tennis is not just a feeling, it is a physical state. It is the difference between a player whose feet move without hesitation and a player whose feet move while the brain is still deciding. And Alex walked onto center court in Stuttgart with feet that had been calibrated against Iga Swiatek all week, which means Leylah Fernandez was simply not going to provide a harder test than what Alex had already been processing. And behind all of this, filling the Porsche arena with an energy that anyone inside that building will tell you was unlike anything they had experienced at a first-round match, was the Eala army, Filipino fans who had traveled from across Germany and across Europe, flags everywhere, chants that had clearly been rehearsed, a noise level that transformed a Tuesday afternoon session into something that felt like a Grand Slam quarterfinal, and every media outlet back home carrying it live, every comment section flooded. The algorithm working overtime to keep up with the engagement, and Alex has talked about what this means to her. She has said it openly, she has said how much the crowd gives her, how it lifts her when her legs are heavy and carries her through moments that would otherwise be hard. And Fernandez is a player who has performed in loud atmospheres before, who thrived at the US Open, but she has never experienced this specific kind of crowd. This specific intensity of a fan base that is not just supporting a player but channeling the pride of 115 million people through one athlete in real time, and that atmospheric asymmetry, that invisible momentum that no tactical adjustment can neutralize, belongs entirely to Alex. And so when the match actually started, when the first games were played on that indoor clay, what unfolded was not a surprise to anyone who had followed the evidence honestly. It was a confirmation. Alex's return game, which has been running at an elite 36.7% return games won rate through the season, was exactly the sledgehammer the matchup called for. She was reading Fernandez's serve early, positioning aggressively, loading the return with depth and weight that forced Fernandez onto the back foot from the very first exchanges, and her breakpoint conversion across the season has been sitting at 39%, nearly 4 in 10 chances converted. And against a player whose serve has been unreliable and whose confidence was already fractured. Coming in, 4 in 10 becomes 5 in 10 becomes 6 in 10 because the pressure compounds. Because every time the server feels the returner is capable of punishing a loose second ball, the weight on that second serve increases and mistakes multiply. And there is also the tactical element that adds another layer of complexity for Fernandez specifically. Both players are left-handed. And that changes everything about the serve patterns that each player normally uses to destabilize right-hand opponents. The wide serve that curves away from righties and opens the court now curves into the forehand of another lefty. The timing cues that Fernandez has spent years building against right-hand servers are reversed. The spin kicks differently, the angles that normally open close down. And while Alex can adapt because her serve relies more on placement and variation than on raw directional advantage, Fernandez's return game, which depends so heavily on reading the toss early and loading into the return with precise timing, was being disrupted by a mirror image she had very limited recent practice dealing with. And this is where the match stopped being competitive in the way a neutral viewer might have hoped and started becoming the kind of one-sided statement that the tennis establishment was going to spend the rest of the week processing. Because Alex did not just win, she dismantled, she was surgical. She was composed in the moments that called for composure and aggressive in the moments that called for aggression, and Fernandez, for all her talent, for all her history, simply could not find an answer, could not locate the rhythm her game requires to function at its best, could not stop the bleeding once the break started coming. And the crowd rose with every point, every game, every decisive moment. And the noise inside the Porsche Arena reached levels that nobody had planned for a first-round Tuesday afternoon match. And when it was over, when the scoreline was final and Alex stood on center court with her arms raised and the flags waving and 115 million people watching back home with their hearts in their throats, what you were witnessing was not just a win, it was an answer to every question that had been asked about this player since the European clay season began. They said she could not win on clay and she kept winning on clay. They said she could not hang with Grand Slam champions and she led one of them 5-1 in the second set. They said Stuttgart would be too big and she walked into the Porsche Arena as an alternate and turned it into her stage. And now the draw opens up. Paolini is next. The same Jasmine Paolini that Alex beat 6-1 7-6 in Dubai earlier this year. She has the blueprint, she has the confidence, she has the crowd, she has the preparation, and somewhere in the background of this whole story is the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca where Alex has been training for years. The red clay that has been her laboratory, the tactical framework that has shaped how she thinks about this surface. And you look at all of it together, the form, the preparation, the crowd, the psychological freedom of a player with nothing to lose and everything to gain, the hunger of someone chasing her first WTA title in a draw that is genuinely reachable, and the conclusion is not complicated. Alex Eala is not a clay court question mark anymore. She walked into Stuttgart as a story and she is leaving it as a statement, and the rest of the draw has been put on notice.